So let's directly jump to our first keynote speech. The opening keynote is really a highlight. You all know the World Economic Forum as kind of the global forum that brings together world leaders, decision makers once a year in Davos. The World Economic Forum had been established by Klaus Schwab, but Klaus Schwab, together with his wife, Hilde Schwab, also established the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship back in 1998. And for this, it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce to you Katherine Milligan. Katherine, she's the head and director of the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship. You've been a research fellow at Harvard University. You have been a global leadership fellow at the World Economic Forum. So really a long track record in the field. And I'm very excited to have you with us for your keynote speech on systems entrepreneurship. With that, big applause and warm welcome to Katherine Milligan.
Good morning. How's everyone doing this morning? All right, let's try that again. How's everyone doing this morning? There we go. Okay. Well, thank you, Leonard, for that wonderful introduction. I'm delighted to be joining you all here. I really want to thank Alex and the whole team for curating a fascinating discussion series, and I really look forward to learning from all of you. I feel privileged to have the opportunity to share with you the journey that we've been on over the past 2 years with our practitioner community to understand what systems change means in the context of social entrepreneurship. So as Leonard mentioned, I'm not going to introduce or say much about the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship. It was founded 20 years ago this year. We are the sister organization of the World Economic Forum, and today we manage the largest late-stage network of social entrepreneurs in the world. By any objective standard, the social enterprises in our network have achieved scale. Vision Spring has increased the productivity and incomes of more than 3.5 million poor people through the sale of glasses in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, creating an economic impact estimated at $280 million US. First Book has elevated the quality of educational materials for low-income children by distributing more than 160 million books and resources to schools and educational programs across North America. Yet despite these big numbers, if you talk to any social entrepreneur in our network, they will say things like, this is a drop in the ocean, and I'm not even 5% of where I want to be. For a sector that has long been obsessed with the holy grail of organizational scale, social entrepreneurship is now coming to terms with the limits of incremental growth. The needs are just too large and urgent. The models for scaling we have developed remain too narrow and take too long. Conventional scaling models borrowed from the private sector, such as branch replication and social franchising, seem woefully inadequate to meet the size of the need. Perhaps not surprisingly, then, many social entrepreneurs who have achieved significant scale, along with the intermediary organizations and the funders that support them, are starting to coalesce around this concept of systems change. It can go by different terms, including equilibrium change, systems entrepreneurship, transformative scale, but many people still conflate these concepts with the operational scale of single organizations. On the contrary, we believe that you can run a small organization and still change a system. So, by social entrepreneurs, for social entrepreneurs is our motto. And since our journey to better understand and document how social entrepreneurs create systems change started back in 2015 with 40 Schwab Foundation social entrepreneurs who came together for our Harvard Executive Education Program, Leadership for System Change, I want to begin by sharing that story. The questions that the social entrepreneurs wrestled with at Harvard revolved not really around the what, but the how. How is the systems change approach or strategy distinct from a direct service model? What does the pathway to systems change look like, and how do you get there? A few social entrepreneurs talked about achieving system-level influence by maintaining a relentless focus on organizational growth. You need to grow your market share to become a big enough player to earn a seat at the table, they said. That's why large companies have so much influence, and that is the pathway that we should emulate. But for many others, indeed, the vast majority, they said that that pathway is not obvious because it will simply take too long. Multiple conceptual frameworks for system change were debated, but there was a general feeling that the practitioners are miles ahead of the academics on this, and that the system theories, concepts, and frameworks on offer are really dense and abstract and hard to apply in a practitioner context. Even so, there are a number of successful social enterprises grappling with how to catalyze system change, and that's where the real learning is. It doesn't matter if that model is tackling healthcare and this model is trying to address financial inclusion. You see yourselves and the trade-offs and the strategic choices that you are wrestling with reflected back at you from another entrepreneur's pathway. And there is huge appetite to learn from the successes and failures of other social entrepreneurs and understand what key decision points made all the difference to the outcome. Did you do it this way or that way? Was that the right choice? Would you have done it differently if you could do it over? These were the questions that we grappled with at Harvard. Concrete, case-based examples help us wrap our minds around these abstract concepts. It can even help you crystallize which pathway you should take or which pitfalls you should make sure to avoid. So that's what we did with our research initiative, which culminated in our report, Beyond Organizational Scale, How Social Entrepreneurs Create Systems Change. The objective of this research report is to help practitioners understand what systems change means in the context of social entrepreneurship, how it is distinct from direct service models, and most importantly, what it looks like in practice, not as abstract concepts, but as a set of concrete activities, processes, and leadership lessons. And we'll get to those leadership lessons in just a moment. But first, I want to pause and get us on the same page about what we mean by systems change. And let's start with the definition of a system. The late Jay Forster of MIT is widely considered the founder of system dynamics back in the 1960s. Today, there is a dizzying array of systems institutions and literature and experts to choose from. And while there's no one right definition that I'm trying to promote, one of the main issues with systems theory is that it is so dense and much of the literature is so academic, it's impenetrable for a lot of practitioners and social entrepreneurs. So I would like to offer a definition of systems by Donella Meadows. The late Donella Meadows, a frequent collaborator of Jay Forster, who was considered the world's preeminent communicator and writer on system dynamics and systems theory before her death. And I'm going to read a short excerpt from her book, so bear with me, Thinking in Systems, a Primer, which is a great place to start. So, what is a system? A system is an interconnected set of elements that is coherently organized in a way that achieves something. If you look at that definition closely for a minute, you can see that a system must consist of three kinds of things: elements, interconnections, and a function or purpose. A football team is a system with elements such as players, a coach, a field, and a ball. Its interconnections are the rules of the game, the coach's strategy, the player's communications, and the laws of physics that govern the motions of the ball and players. The purpose of the team is to win games or have fun or get exercise or make millions of dollars or all of the above. A school is a system. So is a city and a factory and a corporation and a national economy. An animal is a system, a tree is a system, and a forest is a larger system that encompasses subsystems of trees and animals. The earth is a system. Systems can be embedded in systems which are embedded in yet other systems. And importantly, the systems thinking lens allows us to reclaim our intuition about whole systems and hone our abilities to understand parts, see interconnections, ask what-if questions about possible future behaviors, and be creative and courageous about system redesign. So how do we translate systems theory into the messy world of social entrepreneurship? Since our motto is by social entrepreneurs for social entrepreneurs, we ask the practitioners in the Schwab Foundation network to define systems change. Martin Fisher, the founder and CEO of Kickstart International, defines system change as fundamentally and on a large scale, changing the way a majority of relevant players solve a big social challenge such that a critical mass of people affected by that problem substantially benefit. System change involves altering the linkages and interactions that form a system's architecture, the rules and standards that make a system work the way it does, as well as the goals and the norms and the beliefs that, if left unchallenged, can prevent systems from working more inclusively. It involves deep shifts in mental models, relationships, and taken for granted ways of working, as much as it involves shifts in organizational roles and formal structures. Through dozens of interviews, research, and workshops with nearly 100 social entrepreneurs in the Schwab Foundation network, we identified 5 leadership lessons, and I'd like to share each one of them with you this morning. Lesson number 1, embrace complexity and adaptability. The most important tool in the system entrepreneur's toolkit is the ability to embed the solution into the larger system being targeted. Social systems are defined as complex adaptive systems. Complex because they're made up of many dynamic components, and adaptive because participants in the system learn from past behavior and thus change their actions. By embracing systems thinking and considering social issues as a function of systems behavior, system entrepreneurs are moving beyond a direct service model and instead focusing on changing the architecture of the system itself. As Drew Billamoria, the founder of Child and Youth Finance International, describes it, scaling a concept rather than scaling an organization requires a major mindset shift in the social entrepreneurship sector. Over years, Drew came to believe that getting children out of poverty was not possible through scaling incremental service delivery, but rather by shifting the underlying systems that were failing to support children as future economic actors. And that change in mindset led her to make very different strategic choices. She decided to transition from her previous organization, Aflatoon, which provides a curriculum for financial education, to create a much smaller organization dedicated to the concept of economic citizenship for children. And we'll return to that example a little bit later on. Lesson number 2, build the evidence base. Gary White of water.org offers a useful insight, and I love his phrase here. He said, system change starts by examining the conventional wisdom perpetuating an underperforming or failing system. You must debunk those conventional wisdoms, not in a holier-than-thou way, but in an evidence-based way, through leadership and action, and you must communicate that through advocacy. The case of Village Reach illustrates how your evidence base can serve as your link between a direct service model and systems change. Over several years, Village Reach worked with the Mozambique Ministry of Health to redesign and modernize their immunization supply chain. The results were transformative. Vaccine availability increased from 40% to 90%. The rate of children under 5 years of age who were fully vaccinated against childhood disease increased from 68% to 95%. And all of this was achieved at a 20% reduction in government operating costs. When others replicated the approach in other countries, they achieved similar results, which gave Village Reach the evidence they needed to advocate for changes in global immunization policy set by the WHO and other international bodies. After years of persistent advocacy efforts, those vaccine policies were reformed in important ways. in no small part thanks to the robust, irrefutable evidence that Village Reach painstakingly built over years, which meant, as a result, hundreds of millions of donor dollars were mobilized towards modernizing national immunization supply chains. Today, Village Reach is working in a coordinated fashion with partners across 10 countries at national scale to modernize their supply chains. Alan Wilcox, the former CEO of Village Reach, offered this reflection. Data and evidence are crucial to being successful at systems change. And many of the social systems that we social entrepreneurs want to change are filled with players that resist change in order to preserve the status quo. They are generally highly risk averse, which is why they are hesitant to make any changes in their current practices or in the practices of those around them. So, to move them out of their comfort zone towards positive change, we have found it necessary to make it riskier for them to keep doing what they're doing than it is to change. And evidence is the critical tool in doing that. Lesson 3, create, convene, and coordinate coalitions. System change often requires new organizational skills and capacities that an organization might not have in-house. Organizations focused on service delivery do not always have experience or expertise in coalition building, negotiating legislative reform, or technical assistance and capacity building. Each organization we studied has had to hire people for these skills or develop that capacity internally. And this has usually been an iterative process with successes and mistakes along the way. In the context of systems change, the power of convening is the ability to bring together disparate players, potentially from sectors that have not historically worked together. Some system entrepreneurs have gone even further, convening multiple groups and actors across disciplines and traditional boundaries to build common understanding and collective action. One such example is Jordan Castillo, the founder of Vision Spring, the organization I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, which operates a direct service model to get glasses and vision services to low-income people who need them. He decided to step away from Vision Spring to create a multi-stakeholder alliance called iAlliance because he realized that the barriers to solving this problem for the 2.5 billion people around the world with poor vision, like cultural issues, custom duties, and supply chain problems, cannot be solved at an enterprise level. Importantly, while the social enterprises we studied use their convening power to promote a shared agenda and guiding principles, they have not sought to prescribe solutions or endorse their own products or services. In fact, to be an effective convener, these entrepreneurs have learned that it is critical to be an objective actor, as Giroux Billamouria discovered at Child and Youth Finance International. When she began advocating for new policies and attitudes under the auspices of her previous organization, Aflatoon, she was met with considerable resistance from decision makers she was aiming to influence. Why? Because Aflatoon was seen as a service provider with its own vested interests, promoting its curriculum, which prevented it from being perceived as an honest broker pursuing systemic goals. So Giroux's decision to create Child and Youth Finance International as a new entity was largely due to the perceived need among key stakeholders for an objective convener who could effectively coordinate the various actors in the system. And as a convener, Child and Youth Finance International brings together key actors from the finance and education sectors to dismantle barriers, implement educational reforms, and change regulations that prevent children from opening bank accounts and learning how to manage their own finances. Through this approach of creating collective ownership, including at the governance and board level, where all stakeholders are represented, rather than scaling a prescriptive program, Child and Youth Finance International has been able to collaborate with 139 central banks, ministries of finance, and ministries of education, and has actively influenced policy change in more than 70 countries. Lesson number 4, engage government. So, social entrepreneurship developed to a certain degree from a lack of faith in the public sector to solve social problems. But if you seek to change a complex system, you will often need to change the laws, administrative rules, and official practices governing that system. The question now for many social entrepreneurs is not whether to work with government, but how. And the systems entrepreneurs we studied work with government in different capacities: as contractors, delivering services for a fee; consultants, improving the capacity of government to deliver their own services; or advisors, providing advice for policy development or legislative reform. In each of these cases, government engagement offers an opportunity to reform public services for entire populations, often with a sustainable funding source and constituting a shift in the way that services work for everyone. Over the past 40 years, Landesa has worked with dozens of governments to secure land rights for 120 million poor families. Tim Hanstead, the former CEO and now current senior advisor to Landesa, offered really valuable lessons on partnering with government that he learned over decades and that I'd like to share with you this morning. Number one, be intentional about building trust with government partners. Identify who are the potential champions in government. Nurture those relationships. That requires time. In other words, this has to be someone's job description. It doesn't happen on the fly. Number two, understand the perspectives and the priorities of the government representatives that you're working with. If you are coming to them to make your case without understanding what their incentives are and what their priorities are, you're much less likely to be successful. Number three, remember that governments are not monolithic. You have to work with people within individual departments, and there are many stakeholders within government, and they do not all share the same priorities. So you have to just look at governments with a much more sophisticated lens than just seeing government as a single monolithic stakeholder. Four, avoid politics. Do not get sucked into aligning yourself with a particular partisan point of view or a particular party. Five, prepare for the long haul. Working on policy change is long-term work. It is not something that you can accomplish in a quarter. It's a 3 to 5 year time horizon. Last, most important, give them all the credit. You can act as a catalyst, but they're the ones making the final decisions. They're passing the legislation, changing the rules of the game. So whenever there's a success, credit them with it. The last leadership lesson, shifting systems with humility. What do we mean by this? On the most basic level, it's important to recognize how much we don't know and can't predict, particularly unintended consequences. But on a deeper human level, authenticity and trust are critical to creating collective ownership among key stakeholders who have an essential role to play in solving the problem, but who are also leaders in their own right, bringing their own interests, institutions, agendas, and egos to the table. Negotiating that terrain successfully requires attentive listening, honed bridging skills, and intense self-awareness about how you are perceived by others. And in such a context, the inner qualities of a systems entrepreneur or a systems change leader become critical. There's a growing body of evidence suggesting these qualities can be cultivated through a focus on inner well-being and self-awareness. As the Academy for System Change explains, systems change is inherently an inner and an outer process. Because of this, we believe the development of self is foundational. This inner work, which involves developing awareness, compassion, understanding, and wisdom, also extends to teams, networks, organizations, and beyond. And this link between inner work and social impact is something that is being explored by the Wellbeing Project, a coalition of organizations including Skoll, Synergos, and Ashoka. Social entrepreneurs who have participated in the 18-month program systematically report that through a focus on inner work and fostering a greater sense of well-being, they have become more fully and authentic leaders. Sorry. And when you're trying to change systems, authenticity really matters. You must be able to examine how your self-perception differs from how others perceive you. Some of the social entrepreneurs who participated in the well-being program found, to their surprise, that their personal sense of identity has become unhealthily linked over time to the issue that they are trying to solve, or to the organization that they created to solve it. Ultimately, an important shift happens as the entrepreneur identifies with their organization in a healthier way. The goalposts move. The frame widens. There is less insistence on taking credit or doing things a certain way. Building coalitions, nurturing movements, even investing in other organizations become established ways of working. Empowering other leaders becomes possible. Social entrepreneurs have also linked their inner work with a greater ability to build trusted relationships. In complex, multi-stakeholder contexts where communication breakdowns are often the norm, this again becomes a valued personal skill. Active listening and the capacity to maintain open communication and trust are the glue that can bind a coalition together over space and time. Taken together, these qualities enable social entrepreneurs to assume the role of a systems entrepreneur. They become an effective, honest broker, recognized as having the humility to put the collective interest ahead of their individual or their organizational interest, especially when those start to clash, as they inevitably will. Now that we've explored the leadership lessons, I would like to conclude with a couple of reflections and guiding questions to help you explore this further in your own work. Social entrepreneurship has long been burdened with the myth of the hero entrepreneur, the martyr, the visionary, the entrepreneur who will change the world. It is an unhealthy and unsustainable myth. And despite being largely discredited, it still persists. I do not wish to replace that myth with an even more unrealistic one, that of the system entrepreneur who can not only move mountains, but also change entire systems. Let me be emphatic. Systems change is a jointly held responsibility for improving how systems work, including not only social entrepreneurs, but also the leaders and decision makers in government and the private sector, as well as funders and philanthropists. Nor am I suggesting that all social entrepreneurs become system entrepreneurs, or that those considering systems work completely abandon their direct service models. Direct service and systems change work can be mutually reinforcing. Often, the former is the source of legitimacy and credibility and serves as the evidence base to influence the system change work and the other key actors and stakeholders in that system. Many social entrepreneurs build on their direct service model to add distinctly new initiatives or business units with a systems approach. And it can make sense to keep those efforts in-house, especially when the organization enjoys a strong reputation as a respected provider or a platform. Although, as we saw with Giroux, in some cases, a direct service model may be incompatible with creating collective ownership and cause friction or mistrust about an individual's true agenda or motivations. So there's no one-size-fits-all. Every situation requires a different analysis. Now, the report offers a whole set of questions for social entrepreneurs and their funders. I'm not going to go through all of that here, but I do at least want to offer a few to help you get started. The first, does my organization have the necessary credibility or objectivity to influence the system actors. Some organizations are naturally positioned to have systems influence, while others may be perceived as having a bias towards their own products or services. Take an honest look inward to determine how to move ahead at a system level. Second, is my organization's revenue model or funding source conducive to this type of work, or will we need to find additional funding? For many social entrepreneurs, the central question in placing a big bet on systems change is who is the payer? Legislative reform, shifting social norms, changing behavior, sustaining government adoption, these things do not just happen on a shoestring. They have no obvious self-sustaining business models. They need dedicated resources, people, and convening support. They require different skill sets, such as legal expertise or movement building, and often they involve different cost structures than what funders are used to. They also involve some risk and a willingness to change tactics along the way, as some approaches start yielding results and open new opportunities while others fail to pan out. The emergent character of systems change contrasts sharply with the grant requirements of most donors, who typically prefer predictable outcomes and require entrepreneurs to state at the start of a grant period what targets will be achieved at specific milestones along the way. In other words, funding system change requires entering into a true partnership where the funder and the system entrepreneur are committed to learning together, making evidence-based decisions and evolving the strategy as necessary over a period of years. Last, does my organization have the capacity to work at a systems level? Or does it need to build capacity internally to begin this style of working? Systems work may require new skills and organizational capacities that your organization does not have yet. Many organizations have staff members skilled at providing products and services, but don't necessarily yet, anyway, have the system skills of influencing, convening, advocating, and advising on policy. In closing, I would just like to share a quote with all of you. With systems change, one has to move slow to move fast. Although it does at times seem like the timeline is intractable, once you get to the action state, the ability to accelerate the impact and the scale of the work is worth the effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katherine Milligan, for your keynote speech.